Tell us a little bit about your childhood and growing up Catholic in the Bronx, and how do you think that's shaped you in the years that have followed? So,
To quote Steve Martin, I was born at a very young age. Um, it was fun growing up in the Bronx when I grew up. And we grew up in a working class area, somewhat ethnically segregated, but except for the Italian neighborhoods, which were really, they were segregated, mixed up. And we had a great time. It was tons of kids together. You could do whatever you want. You could get in trouble if you wanted. You can go play ball all the time. The transportation system was in New York was phenomenal and cheap. So as soon as you got to be 10 or 11 years old, you could get a quarter and go down to Manhattan and do whatever you wanted. Um, and so I enjoyed that. It was a completely working class area. I sincerely believe that I never met a professional person until I was 30, until I left New York. So there were mostly only people like me, like our family, my father was a bus driver for the city and a trade union guy, and he was active. He didn't have a leadership role, but when the Transport Workers Union in New York got organized under a very interesting gentleman called Red Mike Quill. He was a fascinating guy, and so I didn't have politics as but I did have a kind of unconscious class consciousness, and I knew there were us, and then there were other people who more or less, I don't know, made the rules, passed the laws, did the things.
yeah, because this is, I mean, one of the things in the story that I've always liked that you've told me was about the Catholic nuns that you used to, uh, that shaped you. And could you tell us a little bit about that? So.
Well, my parents were Irish immigrants, and at that time, at least officially, the Irish immigrant community just did whatever the church said.
Right.
Or at least it insisted that everybody else do whatever the church said, and
Yeah.
God would maybe see you when you were doing what you weren't supposed to be doing. But so I went to Catholic elementary school, and the nuns were just like any set of people. There was, various different kinds of people. I had some wonderful women. They were always very mysterious to us. They seemed kind of neutral between. I mean, they were women, but they were covered up. It was like the Burkers, really. They were completely covered. I was going to say we knew they must have feminine figures, but we couldn't see them. And some of them were really tough. I had an Irish nun named Sister Stevens, who was an old woman, and her hearing was bad. And I remember one day at the beginning of a class, when we had a class, everyone was afraid of her, and she would turn around to the chalkboard to write something, and someone would talk, and she'd turn around and say, "Stop that talking." But she didn't know where it was coming from. So anyway, the second time she turned around, walked into the front row, grabbed my friend Eddie, took him up by the hair, banged his head off the board, and sat him down again. And she was left with a lot of his hair.
Oh.
So the church ruled with a tough hand. A lot of the nuns taught me to watch out for them. I became very skeptical about religion as an elementary school student, because they taught me about a loving God but a vengeful God. And so if you crossed God, you were in big trouble, and you would burn in the fires of hell forever. And I thought, well, my father's not so good, but he's not going to burn me in the fires of hell forever. But if we can fast forward, I did discover later on that there are always been two Catholic churches. There's a formal church, a power structure church, a top-down church, and many, over the course of history, a church that officially does very bad things like the Inquisition and the slaughter of the native populations Latin America and North America. But there's always another church, and its size changes and so on, which is a bunch of wonderful people, dedicated people, wonderful, decent people. I did a week-long course on Catholic teaching and social justice at the Maryknoll Mission Institute in Ossining, New York, in the, I don't know, maybe the late '80s, and there were about 45 nuns, and they were all the Maryknoll sisters. They were working in Latin and Central America, and there was a bunch of them had gotten killed, murdered by the officials there, and they were probably the nicest set of people I've ever met, and the most dedicated set of people I've ever met. We went out to socialize 2 nights in the town in a bar, and I remember asking a young woman who was sitting next to me what she did, and she said, well, she worked in Haiti up in the mountains, and she and another sister had a little dispensary, and the peasants all brought their children up to be treated when they were sick at their dispensary, and they often died. They didn't have much. They didn't, it was limited medications. So it was a very sad state. I asked her, what do you do for a social life? She said, oh, we have a great social life. She said, once a month, the bishop of something comes up on his donkey and we have tea. And I thought, this is an awful way to live. I said, how do you feel about going back? She said, I can't wait. And these were the people I thought, if there was a revolution, I wanted to be with them, but not with Sister Stevens.